Hello and welcome back to New Game Plus TV on tour. My name is Jack. I'm here with Jason. Hello again.
Hello again.
We are here on the Yarra River in beautiful Melbourne. It's a gorgeous day out. We're not going to be here for long. We're back to Japan for Bitsummit Day 3. Bitsummit is an independent games festival in Kyoto. It's been running for quite a long time now. We've gone for a few years, and you can check out the previous episodes with both Jason and Em and myself on youtube.com/NewGamePlusTV if you want to. But it's worth asking someone that works in events, because I've attended plenty of events. I've done presenting at events or whatever else, but you've been involved in managing logistics for events. Yes. I guess I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on what goes into managing an event the scale of Bitsummit.
I think it's three-pronged. You have to know what you want to achieve. So if it's so what are we prioritizing? Player activations? Are we prioritizing showcases? Are we prioritizing, TGS is going to have different priorities to Bitsummit, right? So TGS, because of the size and the space, it's a multi-million-dollar event. It has the capacity to do both. When you're a Bitsummit, you've got to, something's got to give, right? So if you think of it from, the kind of level of a CRX. So CRX, you manage to combine all that you've got to have the signing booth, and you've got to have...
It's worth pointing out, so CRX was Crunchyroll Expo. Crunchyroll is an anime streaming service, and so Crunchyroll Expo... that has existed, I think, in a few different ways overseas, but it was short-lived here in Australia.
Yeah, so no comment. Whatever you thought you heard, you're wrong. Basically, you've got to factor in that situation, you have four stages. Yeah. You have all showing different things. You have signing booth, you have activations, you have artist alley, you have all these components you have to put together. So it's more akin to like a game expo in Melbourne, right? And Bitsummit is probably in that same kind of scale, $200,000 show to make. You have to factor in these smaller communities, but it's less about it'd be nice if a lot of the booths had big experiences and big booths and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, people are happy in those kind of expos are happy to sit at a desk with a bit of cardboard or a bit of something fun around it, and play your games and just experience these new games. They want to be the first one. They want that, not the exclusivity of it, but the freshness of it.
The novelty of it. I mean, certainly in episode 1, we played a few games that were particularly weird. There was Bear Run, there was the Receipt Printer one, Barcode. So there's all sorts of weird stuff there, but there are also plenty of just unique indie games that are I guess normal, in that context, normal enough games that you would see released on Steam, whereas a barcode shooter, you probably wouldn't see it released on Steam. So in that way, you've got a bit of a mix still, but still not quite as diverse as Tokyo Game Show.
And I think that's where Melbourne and Japan shares a lot of that spirit. We have obviously great creators. For years we've had people like Chad Toprak and stuff like that who have done these experiential games, these silly little fun games. And
experiential conventions as part of free play as well.
Absolutely, right. And so Bitsummit combines a bit of that into it, and it combines a bit of thing. Whereas, say for example, the Game Expo, it's more about board games, or it's more about chess, it's more about all these smaller communities. So it has a different focus again. So I think the first thing is figuring out what your focus is, figuring out what your scale is, like what you can offer people, because you don't want to over-promise. The worst thing you do is over-promise. It's best to over-deliver. You don't want to under-promise. You don't really want to go, we can only really do this because then it looks poxy. But if you can say, look, we can find that middle ground of knowing what you can accomplish and won't reach the thing. And then I think the third thing is finding things that are enticing, because it is tough sometimes, especially when you're in these small communities, indies, anime communities, all this kind of stuff. You want to look after people, but you've also got to realize that there's no growth in that, and that sounds a little bit capitalistic of me, but you want new people to experience your things. You want your old community to feel comfortable. You want them to...
I think it's also about making something sustainable. Yes. If you're doing a one-off event, it's a very different sort of experience, but a lot of these conventions are, we're doing this year, and then we're going to do a little bit different, do a little bit more, and do all those different kinds of things. So I guess on that note, we're going to head back to Bitsummit. This episode, we're going to discuss what is an indie game? What does that even mean? What's going on? What is a video game? And we're also going to be speaking with Digital Eclipse. I know them weirdly enough from the Game Boy Advance Spyro games. Real weird thing to know. But more recently, they've specialized in sort of remastering very old games and sort of making interactive documentaries. But that's all coming up in this episode of New Game Plus TV on tour. Let's head to Kyoto and Bitsummit.
Digital Eclipse is a video game developer. Our roots stretch back to the early 1990s. Digital Eclipse was the first developer to use the then new technology known as emulation to take a game, from one platform and put it on another platform. In this case, we took arcade games, had them running on the Macintosh computer. this was a really big deal because prior to that, if you were like playing a home version of an arcade game, you were playing something that somebody recreated. They're looking at the arcade game and they're like, okay, well, let me try to make a version of Ms. Pac-Man for Windows or something like that. What Digital Eclipse did was to say, no, it's actually the actual arcade game, running with a piece of software that allows you to play the real thing, at home. And ever since then, Digital Eclipse has been all about treating classic games with the respect that we believe that they deserve. We think these are works of art. We think just as, you would treat a classic film or a classic work of literature, we should do the same thing with video games. And that, just means a variety of things for us. So something that we've done recently would be something like Llamasoft, the Jeff Minter story. Jeff Minter was a British video game developer who was actually pretty popular, I think, in Australia as well, on platforms like the Sinclair ZX81 and the Commodore 64, back in the early to mid 80s. And Jeff Minter he was a bedroom coder. He was a guy who he had a computer in his house and he made his own video games. And he distributed them, by copying them onto cassette tapes and sending them around to customers, things like that. And so a lot of these games were very influential, especially if you were like growing up in the UK. But they're kind of hard to play now. And so we brought them all together into not just a collection of Jeff Minter's classic games, but an interactive documentary that is about the life and work of Jeff Minter. He's a fascinating guy. And you have to understand Jeff. You have to understand where these games were made. You have to understand they were made in the UK. They were made in the early 80s. They were, the culture at the time was influencing those games. And when you understand who made them and how were they made and why were they made, then you see those games as more than just sort of like a ROM of a game you found on the internet. You understand why it's a work of art. So that's what we're really passionate about. We don't just want to say, here's an old game. We want to say, here is a story from gaming history. And then because it's an interactive documentary, it's a video game. While you're watching video clips about the subject, while you're sort of learning about these games, then you can jump in, you can start playing the games. And by the end of it, you've not just like watched a movie, you've not just played a game, you've had this sort of a rich like multimedia, if we want to use that word, experience in which you've just experienced and watched and learned and read and have a much greater sense of like a period of time in video game history that otherwise would have been lost. Some days it seems like classic game preservation is nothing but challenges. Everything is a challenge, from the fact that, games were sort of considered disposable, especially with like computer games. People tended to save their console games because, you have your game console, you have your cartridge, you plug it in, you plug the game in, it works, great. But computers, after a while, if the computer has been in the attic or floppy disks or tapes or things like that have been sitting around, people look at this and they go, I don't know how to set this up again. I can't really use this again. And it goes in the trash. So, challenge number one is you could have games where it might be the only copy of a game and somebody throws it in the garbage. So, it's great that there's fan groups out there. There's people that are going out there trying to preserve absolutely everything, dump the copies of cassette tapes and floppy disks and things like that, really truly rescue these works of art from disappearing. Another, problem is a lot of these are sort of tied up in legal limbo. And so, with amateur preservationists or, independent groups, they'll take something and just sort of put it online. But for us, as a video game developer, it's like, well, we can only do it if we can actually work out all of the legalities of it, which can be a very, very difficult process to work our way through. But, when we're able to solve those problems, again, from our perspective, we're a developer producing official releases of video games. And this is part of the whole of preservation, right? We're doing our part, our other groups are doing their part. What we can do uniquely is we can, for example, we did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cowabunga collection for Konami. Konami had in its archives in Japan thousands of pages of design documents for these games, but only because those were going to sit on pieces of paper in a building in Japan until such time as Konami was legally able to share those with people again because they got the Turtles license back. So because the stars aligned on that, we had this amazing opportunity to show people, the design documents, what the Japanese designers of the Turtles games, what they were writing on paper and how the games all came together, what was cut, what was kept, why were certain decisions made, who made the games. so many of those games back in the day, there were no credit sequences. They were anonymous. And so, but we can show the design documents in some cases, we can show that they're signed by somebody, and we can just glean that information. But we had this one golden chance to do it. And so my feeling was like, we're putting in every document. You know what I mean? And that's why, people are like, why is this game so big? Why did I have to download 6 gigs, to my Nintendo Switch to play a collection of old games? And the answer is, it's my fault, because I wanted every single one of these amazing design documents, because you look at them and they're incredible. I wanted every single one of them to be in there because we had this one golden chance, and that's real preservation, because, otherwise they'd be sitting on a piece of paper in a building in Japan where we have earthquakes and, tsunamis, and the ground could open up and swallow all of these things. And this has happened. This has happened in Japan to stuff, it's like we have to do what we can do. It's like, what can we do as like the official developer of the game to help preservation overall? And that is get it in a 4K scan, put it in there, translate it, because it's all written out in Japanese, translate it in a bunch of languages, and just make it accessible to a couple million people. And, the fact that I get the opportunity to do stuff like that and like make that sort of thing available is really special. Like, I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So what we're showing here at Bitsummit it's called Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, and it is the first in a long time, a remake of the original game in the Wizardry series. It originally came out on the Apple II computer in 1981. It is the game that launched the party-based dungeon exploring RPG series that is so popular today, and it's a full 3D remake of it. But to look at it, you'd say, oh, they sort of redesigned, redid the game, right? Yes and no. What our developers did, and again, this is part of our commitment to authenticity and preservation, is they started with the original Apple II source code, and they ported the 1981 Apple II source code. They ported it to Unreal Engine. And so when you are playing this gorgeous Unreal Engine game, you are actually playing the Apple II version of the game. And when you look at it, you can even see the Apple II graphics running in a little window off to the side to show you that that's the logic that's running underneath this. So this is not us looking at the game and trying to recreate it. This is the origin. And so even with something like a remake like this, that's so important. And the Wizardry series, the reason why we're here at Bitsummit is the Wizardry series was very popular in Japan. And in fact, it's more popular in Japan than anywhere else in the world. And so we knew that the Japanese fans would want to see this the most.
That is a wrap on Bitsummit Drift 2024.
Yes, it is Drift, isn't it?
That is the theme. Why did the drift come? Where did the drift come from? Do we know where the theme is?
I think they just wanted a cool retro aesthetic, and it offered them the chance to do the thick stripes, like the 70s stripes.
Yeah, it did look sick. It was a sick event. It was bigger, but it wasn't too it wasn't more intense, if that makes sense. I think the extra space that the third floor space afforded them made a huge difference in keeping the energy alive in the consumer days without it feeling overwhelming. Goodness, the PAX show floor in some years has been horrendous. Tokyo Game Show gets pretty full on sometimes. That's not really the experience here.
No, and I think, because obviously you've got the upstairs floor is more of the game stuff, and it's where the Sony and PlayStation and stuff, these big boys are. But even then, downstairs was still well populated. A lot of the fan groups were there, a lot of the uni groups were there, a lot of these smaller ones who may not get the attention. And because they were on that first floor, it incentivizes you to check them first. And even if it was a quick walkthrough, you spend 20 minutes walking through the hall, you get a drink, you get a t-shirt, whatever, right? It doesn't matter. Then you go up to stairs, and that's when you spend your hours and hours and hours. And I think so. It was a good layout. I think, credit to them. It was another fun show. It's been fun just staggering around, and yeah, I don't know. There's not much more to really say. John puts on a good show.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's a good show, and I think it's also a good opportunity to kind of see. It's a bit of a litmus test on where the industry is at, not just the Japanese independent games industry, but also seeing where American and European and Australian developers are at, and
Croatian and Wallonia / Belgium, yeah.
New Zealand developers. Code was here, so it's a really fun mix of people to be able to see their work at Bitsummit, but then also be able to catch up with after the show at the River, which I think is by far my favorite part of the show.
So I mean that's a bit inside baseball for the random punters, but that is where a lot of everyone ends up, is down by down by the river there in Sundro. And just remember, always clean up, pick up after yourself, carry a plastic bag, be ready to put rubbish in it. Be a good citizen, because no one likes a bad citizen.
No. We probably should bring it back to Bitsummit a little bit. There were quite a number of games. And this is one of the first conventions in a while where I've been able to play quite a fair few of them, because usually I'm just, camera, hosting, all the rest of it, just running around. But now I'm actually playing games at a games conference, which is a bizarre thought. But many of the sort of games that I played, I also did interviews for, so I don't know that I can speak a whole lot more to them beyond what some of the developers said. You played a lot of games.
Yeah, and it was a good mix. That's what I like about Bitsummit, is it really does have that mix of you've got your standard tropes, you've got your roguelikes, you've got your deck builders. There's a few of those here, and all those kind of fun stuff that I do.
Especially at this event, plenty of games that have the visual appeal well sorted out, and sometimes the gameplay feel doesn't really kind of keep up.
Yeah, and luckily
not as much now. Like it's getting better, but it's still like you see it more here than you do at PAX Oz.
Yeah. We played JDM, like Driftmaster, so that was Japanese Driftmaster, but it was a hardcore racing game in that you have to clutch manual, so it's like Forza Motorsport tier, and the idea is you still get drift points, so you've got to learn how to like double pump clutches and all that kind of stuff to throw the arse end out, and so that appealed to the bogan in me. Like that was very much just like being at home in the MX-5.
Look,
off the Mount Dandenong.
Look, give me an auto Corolla and I'll be able to slide around the corners, but I don't know that I'll be able to. I don't know what a double clutch is, to be honest, dude.
That is yabai. That is absolutely yabai. But no, that was really fun to see. We played Spy Dolls, which was a top-down kind of MGS-inspired retro stealth game. Very similar mechanic, very similar mindset going in. Like the guy knew that, you played Metal Gear Solid. I'm like, yeah, because I kind of knew what to do, and it was very unique in the sense that. It's going to be, he was saying there's going to be roguelike elements and stuff to it, but he didn't want it to be just a Metal Gear Solid homage, if you will. And I think that's where he's done a good job. Even the story elements, while it's something Kojima would do, but it's not something Kojima has done. In that sense, like it had, it's like, you've got to get a good look at his face. That is absolutely something that Hideo Kojima would do. Like he made him get a mask of the guy. Doesn't matter. And the guy just happened to look like Raiden because, of course, he does from 40 years before, whatever, right? So in those kind of senses, it nailed the kind of it echoes it, but it doesn't. It evokes it, but it doesn't ape it. It doesn't become this. I
was gonna say, because when you look at the game, you're like, oh, cool, that looks like MGS, but so much of what MGS means, I think, to people is like the characters and the story and the writing, and so to be able to carve out an identity of itself in that specifically, while still having the gameplay feel, I mean, I can only imagine that it worked pretty well, and would have been quite a refreshing shift to have a bit of a different story, in the MGS model.
Yes, for sure. Splitting off from that, going to a completely different one, there was All You Need Is Help. Now, All You Need Is Help is basically it's 4-player multiplayer game. We're just going to call them Tetronymos. We're okay with that? They're Tetronymos.
Is that copyrighted?
Yes, probably. Doesn't matter. Just don't sue us. Yeah. Basically, you're 4 different shapes. You have to make a shape or you have to complete a specific objective. Some of them are kind of a 2v2 game. Like one of them is like a kind of a mini game of Pong almost. But then there's also ones where it's like you've got to sit on this thing, but then there'll be something cutting across the screen, or you've got to put a colourful block into the mix, and all these kind of silly little things. And the aesthetic was on point, everything was on point, and it's just one of those games that I can say. I think it's hitting Game Pass too. I could be wrong, so don't. That's not a leak. I'm pretty sure that was on their flyer. If I'm wrong, I apologise. I don't think I am. But that's exactly the kind of game I could play on Game Pass all day. You know what I mean? Like it's exactly the kind of cozy. Multiplayer game that I could definitely spend a lot of time doing. Move that on to Gigabash, you know what I mean? And the problem with Gigabash is it's got the Toho license, so Gigabash is a monster kaiju fighting game, like isometric fighting game. Really fun mechanics. It's really tight, like really tight mechanics, which is nice because some of those, I love the concept, but they just doesn't feel right. And this felt good.
That's always the hardest thing to get right, though.
Very War of the Monsters with a lot of those issues removed because I do love War of the Monsters, but. In Japan, they've got the Toho license, so they had Gigon, they had Mecha Gojira, Ghidorah, which they do not have in the West.
Big Man Sugoi.
Well, different thing. But yeah, so you that's a very, very different because you just can't get the license to those kind of games over there. And in the same way that City Surrounded by Shadow doesn't have them. It's just amazing to me, this kind of widespread of games that we're playing that are here, and they all feel right. They all feel like it's a well-curated list of it doesn't have to be a commercial product. It just has to be something that kind of evokes the right spirit. Like we were playing the game that was the VR game. It's like Breakout, but it's like a tennis game, and that's definitely a great one for like you could just chuck some chill sesh up and play that. Gmoda here, my favorite indie developer of what Kukiyomi, Toridama, We Are Gunma. So it's just that great mix of companies that make an indie fest what an indie fest is.
This is our second Bitsummit. I'm pretty sure it's yours as well. And it has grown in size. It has grown in scope. There is more variety here. I guess you can go down the path of just continuing to add more and more like space and more games and more people to it. But how do you try and keep that formula fresh? And as someone who doesn't necessarily work in events, I'm not sure that I'm best positioned to kind of answer that. But I've seen plenty of events in Australia, certainly after enough years. And I'm talking like 5+. Like it takes a while for an event to get old, right? But at a certain point, you want to go, okay, cool. What are we changing? What are we bringing that's new? That isn't just like more exhibitors.
How do you keep the spark alive in the bedroom? I get it, right? And so I think Bitsummit still has that room to grow. Obviously, it's an established name, and they do a good event. But they've added board games this year. They had a lot of the uni groups, had all those kinds of things. So there's room there to grow into that space, like absolutely for sure. We've got all these devs that are available here. There is room for them, and I think it's still got a little bit before it hits that cringe, before it really hits that it can't expand anymore without just becoming a glorified, showcase or whatever.
Well, I guess that's the other point is it probably won't get too tired too quickly. And I'm certainly not saying that this show is tight. It's not. I've had an absolute ball here, but there isn't anything like it. Like a Tokyo Game Show is its own thing, and you can say that Tokyo Game Show has an indie space, but the energy of the indie space at Tokyo Game Show is not the same as Bitsummit.
TGS was one of the pillars. You know what I mean? Like it was E3, it was Gamescom, and it was TGS. They are the pillars, and it's still it's one of the two pillars, but it's still a pillar. It's the basically all of Makuhari Messe, which is huge. Not quite E3 big, but still pretty big. Yeah, and so it does have that different vibe, and it does have those expectations of Sony's going to have a booth, and they're going to be playing their two AAA titles, and then they'll have like a little indie space, and then they'll have a little VR space, and then they'll have a little. Whereas here, it was a more focused show, and I think that's the one thing they managed to do is just keep that focus on to these what you would consider an indie title. And I mean, the hardest part, I would say the bigger concern for me is indie is already a pretty blurred, like a blurred category. My worry would be how it blurs like ongoing and how that affects Bitsummit more than anything else.
Yeah, I get that. I think in the case of like free play, which is like this is so independent, like games, I think the commercial aspect being entirely removed from free play, that's not so much the case here. And I think that distinction between AAA and indie really just kind of needs to give way between AAA and the rest, where AAA is still pretty well defined as massive. Yeah. These are huge projects with hundreds or maybe thousands of people working on them that take years and years. And that's not to say that indies don't take years and years. Christ almighty, plenty of them do. But I think that difference in scope and that difference in approach, and also that like the means to the end as well. Like AAA is, for me at least, has very much grown stale. It has been stale for about 5 years in large part. I think indies are the main reason. Indies and Steam Deck are the main reason that I'm still playing games today. And again, indies broadly is what we're defining as just not AAA.
And I would say we do live in a world of A and B games. You're like for a long time there, it was AAA or you were indie. You were Fez or you were Call of Duty, right? And that was kind of where the world was. And now there's various shades in between. You've got Elix. You've got these games that are like a studio of 50-odd people. That's an A game. It's not a AAA game. It's not that tier, but it's still a game. Even if it's an independent game, it's still on that kind of scale. It's still on those layers upon layers upon layers. And so like I said, I think the defining characteristics are is becoming grayer, and as a result, we're seeing a wider spectrum of games that fit into that thing. And we're also seeing it, on the hip pocket. It used to be, for indie games, it was 15 or 30. Yeah. Now then it's got up to 45. But now you can see $6 games that will keep you going for hours. I mean, Vampire Survivor's $5. So originally it was free. All these Amogus $5. And how much game you get out of it. Yeah, so I think that's been the nice bit, is that you can find your right price point and you can make your money and hopefully do well enough to pay for your next game or whatever you're going to do. It's your business. Do what you want.
Bitsummit being a good sort of jumping off point for a discussion of the games industry and games as products more broadly. But that is a wrap on this episode of New Game Plus TV. Do check out New Game Plus on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're not calling it the other thing. And newgameplus.tv is the website. But that is all for this episode. Jason, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jack.
Catch you next time.